So let's talk about two kinds of no contact. No contact is a big topic that comes up repeatedly. It is viewed as the most advanced of all disengagement strategies. No contact, the end, done, dead to you, won't respond, you can't find me, right? For how much we talk about it, it is not a strategy that most people can use. People in narcissistic relationships where they are managing with minor children or in the workplace, or if you need contact or want contact with selected family members, you may still have to keep seeing the narcissistic family member. You may fantasize about no contact, want no contact, but it is simply not feasible. And while no contact may seem like a great solution, it is not always, and people will report that no contact can bring up grief, that nothing, even approximating a middle ground, could be created. No contact is also sometimes born out of abuses, including stalking, post-separation abuse, and other behaviors that escalate fear and harm to such a level that the no contact is gotten through complicated and painful routes. No contact is not the first step for anyone. Now, when we traditionally talk about no contact, we are talking about active no contact, where you make the concerted decision to cut ties. And this may show up in blocking their phone number or their email address, never responding when they reach out, just being done. You may have already tried gray rocking, the whole disengaged universe. You may have also had to level up to no contact because they were so harmful to you. The annoying insistence of many narcissistic people on staying in touch may then start to escalate to more aggressive attempts to contact you, and then that might be what leads you to pull the plug and go no contact. But there is also another way that no contact happens, and it's not as active. I guess we could call it passive no contact. And this is when there are narcissistic or toxic sort of adjacent people in your life. If you don't put any effort into the relationships, these are people that the relationships sort of disappear. Where I have seen this happen in the most pronounced way is either in extended family systems or in larger friend groups. These sorts of minor narcissistic relationships only work often because you do the work or because circumstances bring you together. For example, a family event or a group event. And other than them being a part of a group where there are people you may care about, you would not have anything to do with them. And in fact, many people in these sorts of fringe narcissistic people relationships will acknowledge that they did try to make these relationships work until they didn't. And then the relationship just sort of faded. One example comes from a woman I had talked to who comes from a very large family system. She had 3 children, and the woman that I was talking with was the one who also cared for her aging parents. The aging parents had some health emergencies, and while she suspected that her extended family members were maybe not full-on narcissistic people, it was clear to her over the years that they were selfish and grandiose and emotionally immature. But she also knew that they loved her mother, who they grew up close and they're very friendly, talk to each other regularly. So when the proverbial shit hit the fan and the mother became ill, the caregiving daughter reached out to the family members that she had attempted to maintain close enough relationships with, calling them, sending them birthday and holiday cards, showing up to their events, that kind of thing. But when the real need came, it wasn't about a party or anything like that, no one would show up. The caregiving daughter said, there was no drama for me. There was no contact moment I had per se. But she said that I was exhausted with work, I was exhausted with the kids, I was taking care of my mother, I was getting an extra job to help with the medical bills. And I didn't have the time to waste with nonsense like remembering these people's birthdays and sending cards and showing up at their events. And just like that, 3 years passed. and there had been no contact between the woman and any of these extended family members. It dawned on her that the contact with her and those family members was something that she was responsible for making happen. And once she realized that when it became real, that they were nowhere to be found, and she saw who they were, even though she sort of suspected it before, but she also wanted to do right by her mother, who was close to these family members. Once she also no longer put in the effort, the no contact thing sort of happened organically. So how many of you have somewhat toxic or even fully narcissistic people in your lives that you are no longer in contact with? Maybe because it no longer was worth the bother. Maybe because your supply was not useful to them. Maybe because it only worked when you did all the work and then it sort of slipped away. And then one day you lift your head and you see that it has been years since there has been any contact. There was no dramatic moment, but you sure as hell don't miss them. And clearly, they can't be bothered. It's not unusual for people in families to drift apart, especially in larger families in some cases. You don't have any negative feelings, life happens. If you saw these folks, you would be happy and you might even catch up with them. But in the case of the more problematic family members, where you don't have lots of ongoing contact with them, but each time you would see them would just be sort of a little bit depleted and exhausted after you see them, it can just slide away, often unless you're doing the work. And this becomes interesting because you are ostensibly no contact. Like that lady should not have had contact with her family for 3 years, right? And it's not really no contact because it feels not no contact because it's not intentional. But you're also relieved to not have contact with them and you have no intention of starting up contact again and you're really kind of glad you don't have to deal with them. Yeah, you may, for example, follow them on social media and perhaps see bits and pieces of their life. That's usually a no contact. You might even cut them out of social media. But this kind of passive no contact, you may not do that. But you just don't feel any need to reach out. As I did this video, I took a moment myself to think of any people in my life I have like this. And it wasn't a small number. It's people that aren't super healthy, kind of selfish, that kind of thing, that I haven't spoken to in years. I'm not even that curious about them. So I guess we'd call it no contact adjacent. Listen, it's not a bad thing when you can sort of quietly fade these relationships. These might be folks who are sometimes enablers or just people where the relationship was never quite healthy, but you might have just kept it around for nostalgia. It's like keeping clothes that no longer fit in a closet. Maybe it's not accurate to call this no contact. Perhaps it's more like lost contact. It also forces all of us to take a long, hard look at relationships that we have where we do most of the heavy lifting, listening and planning. What would happen in those relationships if we held out for reciprocity? My guess? It may just be crickets. There is a bit of good fortune when this sort of fade happens because it gives you more time for the healthier and more reciprocal relationships in your life. Some people experience some grief saying, oh my gosh, they wouldn't even work for me. It's not about you not being worth them working for. They're not going to do it for anyone. And you deserve to clear out the time and have it for things that are good for you. Thanks again.